India has always been seen as a soft power, and in the past few years, it is also trying to show that it can be a tough, assertive diplomacy on the world order. For example, at the annual Valdai conference in Moscow, Russian Premier Vladimir Putin very clearly said that India appears to have a great future and that it can have an increasing role in global affairs. Also adding that Prime Minister Narendra Modi appears to have an independent foreign policy, specifically in interest of his nation. The world is taking note. French President Emmanuel Macron also added that Prime Minister Modi was correct to have said to the Russian president that this is not an era of war, a sentiment that was echoed by Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Before I come to the present, let me take you to some of the previous incidents when India did show a confident image. Liberation of Bangladesh 1970s, Pokhran nuclear test 1998, Kargil war 1999, India-US nuclear deal in the mid-2000s. Different prime ministers, different eras, different times, but decision makers who took action. New India, however, is not about isolated events. It is also about constant, steady interactions that are pushing forward the country onto the world order. The fact is that India is a developing nation and has issues of population poverty, unemployment, religion and caste-based issues, major concerns. And with our uncertain, unpredictable neighbors around us hovering around India all the time, these are tensions that India does deal with. But despite all of that, India is a leader no less. For example, the COVID pandemic devastated the world and India also suffered. Initially, India needed and received aid from Russia, US and the UK, and that specifically on ventilators, medicine and oxygen equipment. But the moment India bounced back, it started to supply aid to nearby nations, specifically our neighbors that needed it. And that in total to 150 countries across the world eventually. Specifically to Bangladesh, Indonesia and Sri Lanka. For example, there was an oxygen express that was sent from India to Bangladesh, and that had about 200 metric ton liquid medical oxygen. An Indian naval ship, INS Airavat, reached Indonesia carrying 300 oxygen concentrators, which had liquid medical oxygen. 100,000 rapid antigen self-test kits to Sri Lanka were also sent for delivery. 500,000 doses of COVID-19 vaccines were sent to Afghanistan and have pledged to send more vaccines and food grains where millions face hunger. This year, when Sri Lanka went into an economic turmoil, it was the Tamil Nadu government with the central government coming together to provide humanitarian assistance, specifically food grains, to be sent to Sri Lanka. During the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan and its brutal oppression of the minorities, it was only India that repeatedly and successfully managed to evacuate over 300 Afghan Hindu and Sikhs, and that with the due respect to the Sikh holy book, the Guru Granth Sahib and the Sarups. We hope that they find a home here in India. This is because evacuation has always been India's strength and we're only pushing it forward. For example, Operation Devi Shakti in 2021 from Afghanistan, Operation Rahat in Yemen in 2015, Operation Safe Homecoming in 2011 from Libya. And we're all aware about that massive evacuation that was done in Kuwait in the 90s during the Gulf War, with thousands of people were evacuated. Now let's talk about the Russia-Ukraine conflict. When Russia invaded Ukraine, the Western nations expected India to take a direct stand, and not just any stand, but a stand against Russia, just like they wanted. India has friendly relations with both Russia and Ukraine, and therefore India decided to take a stand, which it did, and that was end hostility, end the war, go for dialogue. Many here in India were asking, why is India not taking an aggressive stand against Russia? Sounds like a fair question, but there has to be a strategy in place about domestic interests for India to also play along, and a history that India has had with both Russia and Ukraine. India did take a fairly neutral stand and abstained from voting against sanctions against Russia in the United Nations General Assembly. But here's why likely India thought that taking an immediate decision in favor of the US-UK-led campaign against Russia is not in India's benefit. 1. Remember, the United States of America and Russia are old rivals. So there's a game that West is also playing here against Russia. Second, if the United States of America was so serious about Ukraine, why did it not provide the NATO membership much earlier? Because that could have meant American forces and boots on the ground right away. That did not happen. Remember, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky went to the war, believing that the NATO membership was at the door, leaving the Ukrainian Premier begging for NATO membership, cries for help, not only from the Western world, from across the countries, and then asking India here, USA, that India, why are you not taking a direct stand, really? Now, NATO membership is also very tricky. There has been a 1949 enshrined policy, but earlier France and Germany had opposed for the Ukraine's inclusion into the NATO membership. Now, amid all of this, remember, people were dying. They were being killed by the invading forces, and all of this with a global crisis that was also engulfing. Sanctions were introduced against Russia, but a lot of lives were lost by then. Now, let me tell you about India's history with both nations, starting with Russia. Raj Kapoor's songs still resonated with the Russians even today. Hindi film songs are still being sung and have found a connect as a bonding between Indians and Russians. India has a substantial inventory of Russian origin weapons and also a technical assistance in power generation and other steel-making industries. But specifically, as External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar pointed out, that the Western world did not supply weapons to India when it needed. Instead, they were busy overseeing a military dictatorship as a partner right next door, referring to Pakistan. This, remember, are decisions that are reflective of the current situation and the future interests of our country. India has not joined the US sanctions against Russia. It's a decision still being deliberated upon. This, remember, is because US-India relationship is still fairly new, while India-Russia relationship goes back to at least 2 generations, if not more. And that precisely is one of the reasons that India wants to take it slow when taking a direct decision. And that also reflective of an independent foreign policy of this new India. India was one of the first countries to recognize Ukraine as a sovereign nation in 1991. Diplomatic relations were established by January 1992. So there, another friendship that's been. 30 cultural associations promoting cross-country, cross-culture performances, whether it's in yoga, spirituality. This is a cultural bonding that's lasted for many years. There are about 18,000 students studying in Ukraine, specifically in the field of medicine. There are business professionals in IT, pharmaceuticals, engineering. When there were Bucha killings in Ukraine, and is being pinned on Russia, it was India that immediately condemned the massacre and asked for an investigation in the case. At the 77th United Nations General Assembly session, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said, India stands with peace and will stand firmly there. And it is not the first time that India has abstained. This time, and as always, India has stood by its domestic interests. India has abstained previously as well, for example, on issues of Jammu and Kashmir, or on our border interests with Bangladesh or China. As I conclude this episode of Homeland, I want to quote S. Jaishankar when he said, somewhere Europe has to come out of the mindset that Europe's problems are world problems, but world problems are not Europe problems. And as we speak, the United Nations Security Council Counter-Terrorism Committee meeting is being hosted by India. And that, with the India-US ties that are also now being elaborated and discussed and pushed forward, this committee meeting started with paying a homage to the 26/11 Mumbai martyrs. That is the beginning that India is starting to take, that the world notices our issues as well. Thank you for watching.